Well, the United States is ramping up additional assets, money, weapons to the Middle East. Israel says it will wipe Iran off the face of the earth if Hezbollah intervenes in Gaza. The Turks seem to be motivated to mediate. We heard from Erdogan over the past few minutes saying he would like to mediate a peace. This flies in the face of what Secretary of State Antony Blinken just said over the weekend, which is we're not interested in any kind of ceasefire, which is unbelievable. Joining me now is Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who just wrote a new piece saying that the Biden administration should lead the charge to support a ceasefire. Colonel, it appears they're really going in the opposite direction with Blinken's comments yesterday and now Erdogan coming out and saying, hey, we're happy to mediate a peace here.
No, I think that's true. And it looks as though the same people controlling events in Jerusalem are controlling events in Washington. And they are unanimous in their desire for a major war. And I don't think people understand the implications. People are viewing this as Hamas as an enemy that richly deserves to be destroyed. There's no argument about that. The problem is, if you want to destroy Hamas, how do you go about doing it? And collective punishment that involves 2.2 million people is not a very popular way to do business. And particularly at this point in time, because the whole region is seething with anger over the attacks on the civilians in Gaza. There's no debate in the rest of the region about who's responsible. It's Israel. So you have the Israelis and all of their neighbors talking past each other. We are in a position to somehow or another address that and move this out of the realm of inevitable regional war into something more manageable. But there doesn't seem to be any interest in doing so.
The United States moving aircraft carriers, additional assets into the region. You make the point that this, you're right there involved in this. This is a very dangerous prospect for the United States.
Oh, it is. And people don't seem to understand that today's Middle East is radically different from the Middle East of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. The last major war was the 73 war, where Egypt and Syria attacked Israel, and Israel ultimately prevailed, although it was from time to time touch and go. Today, the Arab states are far more, I would argue, cohesive. The governments are stronger. They have more technology at their disposal, and there's a greater willingness to weigh in collectively. And today, we're also talking about Turkey and Iran as playing a major role, and as a result, Russia. Russia cannot sit idly by if Iran ends up being attacked by us. It will feel obligated to intervene because the Iranians have supported the Russians against the Ukrainian proxies. So this has the ingredients in it for a very major war. Now we're escalating across the boards. We seem to think that escalation works. We've tried that in Ukraine. We've escalated and escalated and escalated, and today Ukraine is in ruins. My great fear is that if this regional war unfolds as I think it might, there may be no Israel at the end of it.
You're right. You write in your piece that Israel could become the next Ukraine if we don't watch out. How do you mean?
Well, first of all, Hezbollah that sits up in the north is not simply backed by Iran, but we estimate they have 100 to 150,000 of their own fighters. Plus, some estimates are between 130,000 and 140,000 rockets and missiles, of which at least 40,000 are extremely precise. Now, there's enough armament in Hezbollah to destroy half of Israel. Hezbollah has made it clear that if, in fact, the Israelis march into Gaza with the objective of rooting out Hamas and without regard, frankly, to the loss of life there, and let's be honest, if you're going to march into a city and fight, the notion that you can pick and choose your targets is absurd. So the loss of life will be enormous. This is the catalyst for a regional war. And the Iranians have said it. The Turks have said it. Everyone has said this is unacceptable. King Hussein, or not Hussein, but Abdullah in Jordan gave a brilliant speech in Cairo explaining that he shared the Israelis' horror at what had happened to them, and thought that they had responded reasonably under the circumstances, but said collective punishment that involves 2.2 million people and driving them out of their homes and into the desert is simply unacceptable. And this is an impasse because we have a full court press in the United States to emphasize why we should be doing this, why we should be co-belligerence with Israel. And that's effectively what we're becoming in a very real sense. And that puts us at risk of confrontation with Iran, with the Turks, and with Russia.
Israel over the weekend saying that they will consider civilians who are in the northern part, remain in North Gaza, terrorist accomplices, quoting. The Israeli military has told Palestinian civilians living there that if they don't evacuate south, they will be considered an accomplice in a terrorist organization. So trying to root out Hamas, going into these caves, this is going to be an absolute disaster. It's going to be, I mean, we've already seen how much of a disaster this is. And the Israeli infantry going in, talk about that part of it, going into these cave structures where Hamas has been holed up and living in these massive booby-trapped caves. I've talked to some Israeli sources who tell me that they are absolutely terrified what's going to happen to the infantry if they go in. They will be slaughtered by the structures that are underneath those cities and underneath North Gaza. Can you speak on that, the military strategy of this on the part of the Israelis?
Well, keep in mind that the Israeli Defense Force on the ground consists of a small portion of professional soldiers. The vast majority of people that are being mobilized are simply civilians. They're reservists. I've been told that these reservists are not nearly as well trained and prepared as their predecessors were in 1973. That means that they have even less training and less preparation than you would want for such a complex operation. But let's assume you have a couple of weeks to train. You're not going to reach the level of expertise that you would want to deal with what you're describing, these tunnels. And remember that the Israelis have destroyed most of this area in northern Gaza, which makes it much easier for Hamas to defend itself. When you leave buildings intact, you're always at risk of bad things happening, but you have a way to navigate through it to root out the enemy. Now that everything has been rubbled, you have no idea where you're headed and what you're doing. Now, I'm sure the Israelis will use everything at their disposal: persistent surveillance overhead, careful targeting of anything they think is hostile, and I'm sure that the soldiers on the ground will do the best they can. But that's still not going to prevent you from taking very heavy casualties for all the reasons that you cite, IEDs and so forth. Now, there is one other possibility, and that is that the Israelis may decide to use fuel-air explosive. And fuel-air explosive over a square, let's say a couple of square miles, essentially sucks all the oxygen out of the area and then ignites it into a fireball. We use these things in Vietnam. They could certainly use these things against both Hamas and Hezbollah. And frankly, I think for their purposes, it would be necessary. But imagine the response of the region. Imagine how the Turks and the Iranians, the Egyptians, Jordanians, Saudis, Syrians, everyone will feel when they witness this. Again, I don't see this as a very positive outcome for Israel. And I think we're grossly underestimating the military potential of those lining up against Israel. And remember, Russia does not want to be in this. Right. Russia wants to remain neutral. But Russia's relationship with Iran is very, very close. And if you attack Iran, you're going to end up at war with Russia.
Is the center of all of this MB?
Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos de nuevo a Negocios Televisión. Llega el momento de repasar las noticias más importantes del día de hoy, con el foco puesto en Israel, también en su primer ministro Netanyahu, que poco a poco está perdiendo apoyos en Israel. Prácticamente la mitad de los israelíes piensan que hay que detener la invasión terrestre. Biden también perdiendo apoyos en Estados Unidos. En apenas un mes ha perdido hasta 11 puntos. El foco puesto también en advertencias por parte de Irán, de Bielorrusia, noticias también sobre Rusia y, ojo, también noticias sobre los BRICS y su nuevo sistema de pago. Empezamos hablando, como no puede ser de otra forma, de Israel. Dice que espera lanzar pronto una larga y difícil ofensiva terrestre en Gaza. Esto es lo que ha dicho Yoav Gallant, el ministro de Defensa del país, que apunta que la campaña va a requerir desmantelar una vasta red de túneles utilizados por Hamas. Además, dijo que la invasión terrestre, que sigue a semanas de ataques aéreos, va a llevar mucho tiempo y que va a conducir a otra fase prolongada de combates de menor intensidad a medida que Israel destruye focos de resistencia. Seguimos hablando de Israel. El primer ministro israelí, Benjamin Netanyahu, se ha negado a firmar los planes para una operación terrestre en la franja de Gaza preparado por los dirigentes militares. El liderazgo militar ya ha terminado un plan de invasión, pero Netanyahu ha enojado a los oficiales de alto rango porque se ha negado a aprobarlo, en parte porque quiere la aprobación unánime de los miembros del gabinete de guerra que formó después del ataque del pasado 7 de octubre. Los dirigentes políticos y militares todavía no han decidido cómo, cuándo y si es necesario llevar a cabo una operación terrestre en la Franja de Gaza. De momento, el ejército israelí ha desplegado en la frontera a su ejército y está dispuesto a actuar, pero los líderes políticos y militares no se ponen de acuerdo sobre una solución, según apunta el New York Times. Seguimos con el foco puesto en Israel. El ejército ha dicho que ha llevado a cabo esta misma noche una incursión selectiva desde el mar en el sur de Gaza. La infraestructura militar de Hamas fue atacada y las tropas israelíes operaron en un complejo utilizado por las fuerzas navales del comando de Hamas. En esta actividad han participado embarcaciones y aeronaves de la Armada. Además, los soldados abandonaron el área después de esta breve incursión. Ha sido una operación independiente de una incursión terrestre que también se llevó a cabo anoche a las afueras de la ciudad de Gaza. Precisamente sigue el debate en torno a la incursión terrestre, en torno a la invasión de Gaza, con prácticamente la mitad de los israelíes que quieren atrasar cualquier invasión de Gaza. Cuando se les preguntó si los militares deberían pasar inmediatamente a una ofensiva terrestre a gran escala, el 29% de los israelíes estuvo de acuerdo, el 49% dijo que sería mejor esperar y el 22% se mostró indeciso. Este periódico que ha realizado la encuesta decía que hace apenas una semana había un 65% de apoyo a una importante ofensiva terrestre. Estos resultados parecen indicar una caída en el apoyo a la próxima etapa prevista de la contraofensiva contra los militantes de Hamas. Israel, como ya saben, ha prometido aniquilar a Hamas en respuesta al ataque del pasado 7 de octubre. Precisamente el ejército ha elevado hoy mismo a 229 personas el número de rehenes que todavía está en manos del grupo islamista palestino de Hamas y de otras milicias de la Franja de Gaza. El portavoz de las Fuerzas de Defensa israelíes, Daniel Hagari, ha indicado que han informado a las familias de los 229 secuestrados que siguen retenidos en la Franja de Gaza. Pendientes también de los ataques de Estados Unidos. Ayer mismo, por la noche, en Oriente Medio, 2 ataques contra instalaciones relacionadas con la Guardia Revolucionaria de Irán en el este de Siria. Esto es lo que ha dicho el secretario de Defensa estadounidense Lloyd Austin en un comunicado en el que ha anunciado que en las últimas horas las fuerzas militares estadounidenses han bloqueado 2 instalaciones en el este de Siria utilizadas por el cuerpo de la Guardia Revolucionaria Islámica de Irán y grupos afiliados en respuesta a una serie de ataques recientes contra personal estadounidense en las bases de Irak y Siria. El presidente estadounidense Joe Biden, según apunta Austin, ha dirigido esta acción para dejar claro que Estados Unidos no va a tolerar estos ataques y va a defenderse a sí mismo, a su personal y a sus intereses. Además, eso sí, el propio Austin ha enfatizado en que no están buscando un conflicto y que no tienen intención ni ningún deseo de involucrarse en más hostilidades, pero que los ataques respaldados por parte de Irán deben terminar y son